Well, hey guys, welcome to First Timothy chapter 5. And as I said yesterday, this chapter is really to church leaders, by church leaders, for church leaders. And not only that, it's by, for, and about church leaders in the first century. So we're going to have to do some mining and get through some cultural pieces in order to really understand what they're talking about. And especially, I'm not going to spend much time from verse 9 through verse 20, just talking about the way to treat widows in the church. This was, we should obviously take care of widows and orphans. Like, this is absolutely what the church should be doing. And yet, culturally speaking, the way we do that is a little different now because they were in a culture without any social systems that people could tap into. No cars, airplanes, families live very close together. And so exactly like, this widow, you should encourage her to get married again. This widow, you should take care of her, let her serve. Like, all of that stuff is, we're going to have to like adjust for cultural differences. And yet there are a few passages in here that I go, man, we can really not only hang on to that, but this really tells us a lot about where our priorities are supposed to be as Christians as it relates to family, church family, and just where our, how should I say that, loyalty should be, where our effort should be, who should benefit by our work. Let's start right at the top. As remember, Paul, a little older, Timothy, pretty young. And he's told Timothy a lot about, like, hey, hold people accountable and be sure you have qualified elders and all this stuff. And I wonder if he's just even imagining Timothy sitting there going, oh my gosh, how do I, as a young man, how do I rebuff an older man? Like, do I speak really boldly? Do I accuse and point fingers? Do I drag him in? Do I say, I'm the Lord's anointed, you got to listen to me? What do I do? Do I let things slide because they're older than I am? How do I lead in this context? And so Paul says, do not rebuke an older man. Well, that's encouraging to me, because I don't really want to rebuke an older man, somebody who is my father's age or whatever. As a leader, Timothy needs to take sin seriously and care about and not let evil leaders and selfish leaders in the church. And yet the way he goes about leading has to be with grace. So he says, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Oh, that's very different, isn't it? When you approach your father with a difference of opinion, or you approach your father with, hey, Dad, here's something that's important to me. As I lead, this is something that we need to talk about. That's very different than, open rebuke. And really, I think the language in there is like somebody you love. Don't approach people like they're in the way. Approach people like you love them. You want their life to go well. And when you need to challenge them with something, it's for their good and for, the benefit of the body. So at the core of any disagreement must be love. If you aren't approaching somebody because you just really love them, you probably shouldn't be approaching them. If you're approaching them out of, I think this is for any conflict, if you're approaching them out of anger, out of fear, out of disgust, out of bitterness, out of an assault against your place of power and authority, man, you're not ready to talk to them yet. You need to pray that through. You need to get on your knees and pray for love in your heart for that person, so you could approach even somebody older than you with love as you would your dearly loved father. People are not in the way of ministry. People are the ministry. I don't care if you're just showing up and your ministry is just showing up and singing songs and studying alongside people at church. They're not in your way. They are the ministry. These are the people that God's given us to go through life with. So then he says, as you would a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, all in purity. Man, that is a really valuable way to look at the world. If we are in the family of God, then all there is family. So we wouldn't approach people with differences of opinion, like like we want to win something. Rather, we would approach them like our dear sister. I have a sister. I don't have a brother, but I have a sister. I have a mom. I have a dad. And I think about how, of course, in family conflicts come up and how you approach somebody that you love with that kind of intimate, like long suffering love. Like, come out the end of this, we're still going to be father and son. Come out the end of this, we're still going to be, mother and son. We're still going to be brother and sister. And if you have this kind of love, then it gives you an idea of how to handle conflict. Look down to verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I think there were some that were saying, look, sell everything and give it to the church, and forget about your family. The church is your family now. It's true. The church is your family. The church is your family now. Forget about your relatives. And Paul would say, no, the first part of provision, the first line of care should be family. We live in a time where families are so broken down. This is much harder. Many of us don't have a lot of family to care for us. And if we do have family to care for us, we're fortunate. And so Paul makes it clear, if there's not family there, well, then that's where the church comes in and becomes those caregivers. The church has to be ready, willing, and able to care for people who don't have that kind of support. But he says, look, if you have a mother, brother, sister, father who are struggling, it is your responsibility to take care of them. And we have this kind of launch and leave kind of mentality, but the scriptures would say your priority should be treat everybody in conflict, treat everybody as a family member. And then the people that are your family members, man, that's your first job. Your first job is to take care of people that you're related to. And that's super important. Jump all the way down. Again, we could dig into what Paul's talking about with the way they cared for widows. That just happens different in 2020. And so there's principles there. But just since we're just doing devotions, let's drop down to, and I'll skip the part 2 about elders who are doing a good job preaching and teaching. Don't muzzle the ox and be sure they're getting their wages, partly because I'm spoiled rotten in that regard. And also because, again, it's a different culture. Paul didn't take a salary. There's nothing wrong with not taking a salary. Then he says, hey, if guys are laboring, spending all their time working in the ministry, go ahead and give them a salary. There's, I think great freedom as long as we're not selfish. But look at verse 21. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging. Do nothing from partiality. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. Man, Timothy, while you are doing a good job leading the church, your first job is going to be to take care of yourself spiritually. Your first job is to make sure that while you're caring for others, while you're preaching, while you're leading, that bitterness doesn't grow in your heart. And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to have to be something that you pay attention to. So Paul uses this dramatic language. You think of Deuteronomy, I call heaven and earth against you. He says, in the presence of God and Jesus and the elect angels, like everybody's watching, Tim. So I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging. Don't be judgmental. And I charge you to do nothing from partiality. Don't pick favorites. Doesn't matter why you might be more drawn to one person to another. Don't do anything out of partiality. And don't be hasty and lying on of hands. Like, hey, when it comes time to ordain or to select, don't be hasty. And nor take part in the sins of others. So also don't, and this speaks to church discipline too. Like, hey, don't be hasty in this stuff, and be sure you don't get sucked into living a sinful life. Those of us that minister, it matters. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. Paul cares about Timothy. He's like, hey, I know your stomach's bothering you, man. Go ahead, take a little wine for your stomach. There's that personal care there. The sins of some people are conspicuous, going before them to judgment, but the sins of others appear later. Look, I think of the wheat and the tares. You know, he's going to say, look, some sins, some people's rebellion is going to be right out there in your face. Others, you're going to feel betrayed. It's going to seem like they're walking with the Lord for a long time, and it'll appear out of nowhere. So also good works are conspicuous, and even those that are not can remain hidden. Man, Paul's focus for Timothy is just that he would have a deep love for his congregation, that he would treat people well, that he wouldn't see, the church leadership as a place of power, but as a place of service. Man, I think that might be the most important thing about church leadership. It's good to desire to serve in a church. If you've been a Christian walking with the Lord for any length of time at all, your job is to serve. Like, jump in, serve, get on a ministry team, teach some Sunday school, or help, clean up after stuff, or if you have financial gifts, lead in that way. Or if you have leadership gifts, lead in that way. If you have gifts that would be a blessing to the church, facility, bless in that way. But use your gifts to serve the church and minister with people. But man, that should never be seen as a position of power, rather a position of service. We have a king. We don't need another one. His name's Jesus. We're all his subjects. We're all in his family. And that's the good life. All right, Lighthouse, be loved.